"Please, don't take the cloth off," she begged, and his warrior's heart trembled. The village lay quiet under the soft glow of the evening sun. Opening small cooking fires drifted lazily through the narrow streets, carrying the scent of bread and herbs. Children played near the well, their laughter echoing softly, but a sense of unease lingered, almost invisible, like a shadow hiding in the corners. The village had survived the war, but scars, both visible and hidden, remained etched into the homes and the people. He arrived without ceremony, a man shaped by countless battles, his uniform dusty and worn, his boots carrying the mud of distant lands. His eyes, sharp and alert, scanned the village as though expecting danger to appear from behind every doorway. People looked at him with caution. Soldiers had been both protectors and destroyers in these parts, and he was aware of the weight of suspicion he carried. Still, he walked steadily, his posture confident, yet his expression hid a weariness that only long years in war could bring. The soldier had seen destruction the likes of which most people could never imagine. Towns reduced to ashes, families torn apart, and the unending cruelty of fighting men. He had learned to bury his feelings deep, to rely on instinct and discipline to let no weakness show. But there was something about this village that made him pause, not fear, but a quiet curiosity, almost a longing. Maybe it was the soft warmth of life clinging to simple routines, or perhaps it was the people who dared to keep living despite everything they had lost. He came upon a small square where villagers had gathered. An old man sat on a bench, sharpening tools with care while women drew water from the well, their movements precise, almost rhythmic. One of them, a woman who looked younger than she truly was, caught his attention. She was tending to a wounded man, carefully wrapping a cloth around his arm. Her hands moved with skill and tenderness, and yet there was a sharpness in her eyes that told him she had seen more suffering than her years should have allowed. The soldier watched her quietly at first, not wishing to startle her. She seemed to sense his gaze and looked up. Their eyes met, and in that brief moment something unspoken passed between them. There was recognition, an understanding of pain, even if it had been shaped differently in each of them. He saw strength in her, but also the fragility that comes from surviving too much. And for the first time in years, he felt a pang of connection, a reminder that life could still hold meaning beyond the battlefield. He approached slowly, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. "I can help," he said, his voice low but steady. The woman studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly as if measuring his intentions. Finally, she nodded, stepping aside just enough to allow him to see the wound she was tending. It was not a large wound, but it had been left untreated for some time, and the skin around it was raw and red. He knelt beside her, careful not to touch her without permission, and began to inspect it. "You've been helping many?" he asked gently, trying to start a conversation to bridge the gap between their worlds. "Yes," she replied softly, her voice carrying a quiet resolve. "As many as I can. There's always someone who needs help." There was no bitterness, no self-pity, only a determination that made him respect her even more. He worked carefully, following her lead and respecting the boundaries she set. She didn't ask for him to remove the cloth entirely, only to assist in a way that would ease the pain and prevent infection. And in that moment, he understood something he had almost forgotten. That courage is not only in facing enemies, but in allowing oneself to be vulnerable in front of another person. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the square. Villagers began to retreat to their homes, leaving the two of them alone. The soldier noticed how tired she looked, yet she continued to move with purpose. He wanted to speak, to say something comforting, but the words felt heavy in his throat. Instead, he simply remained nearby, offering silent support, aware that sometimes presence alone could mean more than any words. As he worked, memories of the war surfaced unbidden. Faces of comrades lost, towns he had failed to protect, the sounds of conflict echoing in his mind. He shook them away, focusing on the present. This was not a battlefield of blood and fire, but of healing, and he realized that it demanded a different kind of bravery, one that required patience, gentleness, and respect. The woman glanced at him briefly, noticing the tension in his jaw and the shadow in his eyes. "You've seen too much," she said softly, almost as a statement rather than a question. He didn't answer immediately, unsure of how to explain the weight he carried. Instead, he nodded, letting her words acknowledge what he could not speak aloud. There was no judgment in her tone, only understanding, a rare gift he had learned to cherish. Night began to fall, and the square grew dim under the fading light. Lanterns flickered on, casting a warm glow on the stone streets. The soldier prepared to leave, but found himself hesitating. Something about the quiet strength of this woman, the resilience of this village, had stirred a feeling within him he had long suppressed. A sense of hope, fragile yet persistent, began to take root. She watched him, and for a moment, vulnerability shone through her composure. There was a hesitance in her eyes, an unspoken fear of exposure, yet also a silent plea for understanding. And in that instant, he felt his own heart tremble, not from fear, but from recognition of shared humanity. Two lives marked by suffering converging in a moment that neither could have anticipated. As he walked away from the square, he glanced back once more. She returned his gaze briefly, and their eyes locked in a silent promise to protect, to respect, and to honor the fragile courage that had brought them together. The war outside the village had left scars, but within these walls, in the quiet acts of care and bravery, he glimpsed a different kind of victory, one that could be fought without swords, without bloodshed, but with patience, empathy, and the simple act of being there for another person. The soldier continued down the street, the sound of his boots softened by the cobblestones. Yet he carried with him a new awareness that strength was not only measured by survival, but by the capacity to care, to respect, and to see another human being fully, without judgment. And somewhere deep in his warrior's heart, he knew that meeting her had changed something irrevocably. It was the beginning of a journey neither of them could yet fully understand, but one that promised growth, healing, and perhaps, in time, a kind of peace they had both been searching for all along. The days passed slowly in the village, but for the soldier, each day carried a quiet tension he had not felt in years. He had come expecting routine, a brief stop before moving on, yet something about the people, and especially the woman, kept drawing his attention back. Her presence was calm but powerful, like the steady flow of a river that could carve through stone over time. She moved through the village with purpose, helping the sick and wounded, her hands steady and gentle, her eyes always alert. And though he tried to remain distant, he found himself watching her, observing the small, deliberate ways she cared for others. One morning, the sun had barely risen, and the village was wrapped in a soft, golden light. He spotted her near a small garden behind one of the houses, tending to a man who had been bitten by a stray dog. She worked with precision, cleaning the wound, applying herbs, and speaking softly to the injured man, as if her voice alone could ease the pain. The soldier approached quietly, his boots making soft sounds on the dirt path. "I can help," he said, keeping his voice low, careful not to startle her. She glanced at him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You can watch," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. "I don't need anyone else interfering." He nodded, understanding the boundary. He stayed a few steps back, observing how she moved, how she spoke, how she tended not just to the wound, but to the person beneath it. She wasn't just applying medicine. She was offering comfort, patience, and dignity. It was something he had rarely seen in the chaos of war, where injuries were often treated as routine tasks, stripped of human connection. As he watched, he noticed the small tremor in her hands as she tied the cloth over the wound. It was almost imperceptible, but he recognized it. Fear. Vulnerability. The soldier had felt that same tremor himself countless times. Before battle, before making choices that could cost lives, before witnessing death. And in that moment he felt a strange desire to protect her, not out of duty but out of something far deeper, something he had almost forgotten existed in him: compassion. Later that day he found himself walking alongside her as she collected water from the well. The village was quiet, the midday sun casting long shadows over the stone streets. She carried the bucket carefully, her posture upright despite the weight, and he noticed the faint lines of fatigue around her eyes. "You do a lot," he said quietly. "I've seen how hard you work." She glanced at him, a faint smile touching her lips, though her eyes remained serious. "It's not hard if you care about the people you help," she replied. "I've learned that small things, like a clean bandage, a warm meal, or a kind word, can mean the world to someone." He nodded slowly, impressed by her resilience. "I've seen a lot of suffering," he said, "but I've never seen someone care with such patience. It's different." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked away, her gaze resting on the distant hills that framed the village. There was a sadness there, a quiet weight, and he realized she carried more than the injuries she tended. She carried memories, loss, and the burden of responsibility for people who had little else to rely on. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of pink and orange, he returned to the square where he had first met her. She was seated on the steps of a small chapel, her hands folded over her knees, her eyes focused on the ground. Something in her demeanor made him pause. She wasn't working, wasn't speaking, wasn't smiling, just sitting quietly, lost in thought. He approached slowly, unsure if he should speak. Finally he said, "Do you ever get tired?" She lifted her head and met his gaze. There was a flicker of surprise in her eyes, as if no one had ever asked her that before. Then she nodded. "Yes," she admitted softly, "every day. But the people need someone. If I stop, who will help them?" Her answer struck him deeply. He understood the feeling all too well. In war, someone always depended on you, and failure was not an option. But unlike the battlefield, where strength was measured in survival, here strength was measured in endurance, patience, and care. And she carried it all with grace, even when the weight seemed unbearable. He hesitated for a moment, then asked gently, "May I help you with something?" Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment he thought she might refuse. But then she nodded slowly. "There's a man recovering in the house near the market. He has a wound that... I don't want to remove the cloth completely. It's sensitive. Could you help me monitor it while I prepare some herbal ointment?" He agreed, grateful for the chance to assist, but also aware of the delicate boundary she had set. When they arrived, she moved aside, and he carefully observed, making sure not to touch the bandage directly. She explained each step softly, teaching him how to ensure the wound remained clean, without violating her patient's privacy or dignity. Throughout the evening, he realized something he had long forgotten. trust could be built in small, quiet acts. It was not given lightly, and it had to be honored. Her trust in him, allowing him to assist, even indirectly, was a gift he did not take lightly. And with each careful motion, each shared glance, he felt a connection growing between them, fragile but undeniable. As night fell and the village settled into quiet, he noticed the soft lines of exhaustion in her face. "You should rest," he said gently. "Even heroes need sleep." She shook her head, smiling faintly. "I can't rest yet. There's too much to do." He nodded, understanding, but he remained by her side, a silent guardian in the stillness. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to feel something other than duty or discipline. He allowed himself to feel respect, admiration, and the beginnings of a bond that went beyond words. Later, when the village had gone silent, he walked back to his temporary shelter, his mind replaying the day's events. He had come expecting a simple stopover, a chance to rest and move on, but instead, he had encountered a woman whose courage and compassion had stirred something deep inside him. He realized that the war had taken much from him: his peace, his innocence, his ability to trust. But here, in this quiet village, he glimpsed the possibility of healing. He thought of her plea from the first day, not to remove the cloth completely, to respect boundaries and vulnerability. At first it had seemed like a small, simple request, but now he understood. It was more than that. It was a test of his empathy, a reminder that true strength was not measured by force or skill, but by the ability to honor someone else's needs, to protect without overstepping, and to care without controlling. The soldier lay down that night under the soft light of a lantern, the sounds of the village lulling him into thought. He could feel the weight of the day, the memories, the lessons, the growing awareness that he was not alone in his struggle to carry pain. And though sleep was slow to come, he felt a quiet hope rising, fragile but persistent. Like the first light of dawn, tomorrow, he knew, would bring more challenges. But he was no longer just a soldier. He was someone learning to understand courage in a new form, someone beginning to see that caring for others required not just action, but patience, respect, and heart. And somewhere deep within him, his warrior's heart trembled, not from fear, but from the realization that love, trust, and compassion could be as powerful as any sword he had ever wielded. The next morning, the village awoke slowly, wrapped in a gentle mist that softened the edges of the houses and fields. The soldier stepped outside, taking a deep breath of the cool, fresh air. There was a quiet beauty here that reminded him of a life he had almost forgotten existed, a life far from the chaos of battlefields and endless marches. And yet, with every peaceful moment, he felt a quiet tension inside, a memory of war that never fully left him. He found her near the edge of the village, carrying a small basket filled with herbs and bandages. Her steps were measured, careful, as if she were balancing the weight of not just the items she carried, but the lives of the people depending on her. She noticed him and gave a small nod, a silent greeting, but there was no ease in her posture. She moved with vigilance, eyes scanning her surroundings, a habit he recognized well, the habit of someone who had seen too much danger and learned to anticipate it at every turn. "Good morning," he said softly, keeping his distance to respect her space. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "Morning," she replied, her voice calm but carrying the hint of weariness that came from endless responsibility. He wanted to ask her more, to probe gently into the thoughts that clearly weighed on her mind, but he held back. He had learned from experience that some walls are not easily breached, and forcing words could cause more harm than good. Instead, he walked beside her in silence, observing her work and the care she took with each task. They reached the small house near the market, the same place he had assisted her the previous evening. Inside, the man with the sensitive wound lay resting, a faint groan escaping him as she adjusted his blankets. The soldier noticed her hands tremble slightly as she approached him, a tremble not from fear of the patient, but from the weight of responsibility she carried. "Please," she said quietly, almost to herself, "let this heal without causing more pain." He watched her, understanding. Her words were not just about the wound. They were about respect, compassion, and trust. She was asking him, indirectly, to honor that, to act with care, and not to let his instincts as a soldier push him toward quick, decisive action. And in that request, he felt a strange stirring within him, a recognition that strength could take many forms, and that gentleness could sometimes be harder than force. As the day wore on, the two of them worked side by side in silence, tending to the injured, distributing food, and checking on the sick. The villagers moved around them, giving space but watching with curiosity. The soldier noticed how often their eyes lingered on her, as if they, too, sensed the quiet authority she carried. And yet, despite the admiration of others, she remained humble, focused entirely on those in need, rather than the attention she received. At one point, the soldier had to leave the room to fetch a fresh supply of cloth. As he stepped outside, he leaned against the wall, allowing himself a moment to breathe. The weight of what he had seen in the past, the memories of comrades lost and towns destroyed, pressed against his chest. He had survived countless battles, yet here, in a quiet village, he felt the unfamiliar pressure of moral choice, empathy, and restraint. He realized that war had taught him to fight, but life was now teaching him to care. Returning with the cloth, he found her sitting quietly, hands folded over her knees, watching the man breathe steadily. He hesitated, unsure if he should speak. "Do you ever feel afraid?" he asked, softly. Her eyes met his, and for a moment he saw something he hadn't noticed before. Fear not of others, but fear of failing those who depended on her. "Every day," she admitted. "I'm afraid I might not be enough, that someone might get hurt, or worse, that I might make a mistake that I cannot undo." Eddie nodded slowly, understanding her burden. He had carried similar fears himself, though his had been sharpened by the immediacy of life and death in battle. Here the stakes were different. They were measured not in seconds and bullets, but in trust, patience, and careful choices. Yet the fear was the same. The fear of failing someone who relies on you entirely. Throughout the afternoon they worked together, a quiet rhythm forming between them. She would instruct, and he would follow, learning not just the tasks, but the respect behind them. Each small success, keeping a wound clean, soothing a fever, offering comfort to someone in pain, built trust. And with each success he felt his own heart soften, the hard edges of years in combat giving way to something more tender and human. As the sun dipped low, she finally allowed herself a moment of rest. They sat on the steps outside the house, the evening light warm and comforting. She wiped her hands on a cloth, her face revealing the fatigue of the day. He wanted to say something, to offer reassurance, but words felt inadequate. Instead, he simply sat beside her, offering his presence, understanding that sometimes silent support was the most meaningful gift. "Do you ever regret staying?" he asked carefully, curious about her unyielding commitment. She looked at him, her gaze steady. "No," she said simply, "even when it's hard, even when I'm tired, someone has to do it, and if I can help even one person, then it's worth everything." Her words struck him deeply. He had spent much of his life fighting for causes he believed in, yet he had rarely paused to consider the quiet acts of courage around him. Here was someone whose bravery was measured not by battles won, but by compassion shown and suffering eased. And in that moment he realized that courage could take many forms, and that the heart could be a battlefield in itself. Night fell fully, and the village was quiet except for the distant sound of crickets and the occasional bark of a dog. They walked slowly back toward the square, each step deliberate, as if neither wanted the day to end too soon. The soldier noticed the soft light in her eyes, a flicker of warmth and humanity that reminded him why he had come to the village. At the edge of the square, she paused, turning to face him. "You've done well today," she said quietly. "Thank you for helping me." He nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. "No," he replied softly. "Thank you for teaching me patience and respect and how to see someone's strength in a way I hadn't before." She smiled faintly, a small gesture that seemed to carry the weight of the day and the acknowledgement of shared understanding. He realized that for both of them, this partnership, however brief, was changing them. She was teaching him to care beyond duty and discipline, and he was learning to honor vulnerability without exploiting it. As they parted for the night, he found himself looking back at her one last time. She was adjusting the cloth on another small wound, her movements precise and tender, and in that moment he understood that true bravery was not always loud or visible. It could be quiet, steadfast, and patient. It could be found in the choice to respect another's wishes, to act gently when the world demanded harshness, and to remain steadfast in the face of invisible battles. He returned to his shelter, the events of the day replaying in his mind. Every glance, every small action, every word spoken quietly had left an impression. He had expected to find a temporary refuge, but instead he had discovered a place that challenged him, tested him, and opened his heart in ways he had thought impossible after years of war. As he lay down that night, listening to the soft whispers of the village sleeping, he felt a tremor in his warrior's heart, not of fear, but of awakening. He was beginning to see that life after battle required a different kind of courage, the courage to care, to respect, to honor another person's vulnerability, and to face one's own emotions honestly. And in the quiet darkness, he allowed himself to hope that perhaps, in this small village, both he and the woman could find a kind of healing that had long eluded them. The following morning arrived with a cool breeze that whispered through the village streets. Birds called softly from the trees, and the scent of fresh bread mingled with the earthy aroma of the fields. The soldier walked through the village, his boots crunching on the dirt path, his mind already reflecting on the days that had passed. He had come expecting rest, a temporary stop, yet the village and its people had a way of drawing him in, making him feel a responsibility he hadn't felt in years. The woman was waiting near the small garden, her hands busy with herbs, her expression focused but gentle. She looked up as he approached, her eyes meeting his with a calm acknowledgement. For a brief moment there was a silent understanding between them, a shared sense of purpose that needed no words. Today, however, felt different. There was an unspoken tension, a quiet knowledge that challenges often appear when least expected. A sudden commotion drew their attention. From the edge of the village, a villager ran, shouting warnings of a man who had collapsed near the fields. The soldier and the woman exchanged a quick glance, instincts kicking in immediately. They moved swiftly, the soldier leading the way to clear a path, the woman keeping her focus on calming the frightened bystanders. When they reached the man, he was pale and shivering, his body racked with spasms. His clothing was damp with sweat, and his eyes flickered with fear. "We need to keep him calm," the woman said quickly, her hands moving to inspect him carefully. "Do not touch the cloth covering the wound. It is sensitive." The soldier nodded, stepping back slightly, observing as she worked with precision and care. He could see the fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for the man before her. And yet, even in that fear, there was confidence. Confidence born of experience, compassion, and patience. He admired her strength, recognizing a kind of courage that differed from the battlefield bravery he was used to. The man's condition worsened briefly, and the soldier felt the old instincts of command and action rise within him. His mind raced, thinking of quick solutions, decisive movements, everything he had learned in years of war. But then he remembered her words, her plea not to violate the bandage. He hesitated, recognizing that some battles were not fought with speed or force, but with restraint, empathy, and careful attention. Watching her, he learned something new about courage. True bravery, he realized, was not just facing enemies or danger. It was in holding back when every instinct told you to act, in trusting someone else's judgment, in respecting vulnerability and limits, even when it might be easier to ignore them. He stayed beside her, ready to assist in any way that honored the boundary she had set, and felt a strange warmth grow in his chest, a combination of respect, admiration, and a newfound tenderness. The woman worked steadily, her movements precise, her voice calm. She whispered reassurances to the man, keeping his fear in check, and applied herbal compresses carefully to reduce pain and swelling. The soldier noticed the gentle way she placed her hand on his shoulder, not commanding, but supporting. It was a subtle gesture, yet full of power, the kind of power that heals and strengthens without demanding obedience. As the man's breathing gradually eased and color returned to his cheeks, the soldier felt relief wash over him. He had witnessed her bravery firsthand, and it had left a mark on him. He realized that life's challenges were not always visible or dramatic. Sometimes the battles were quiet, intimate, and deeply personal, and those who could face them successfully possessed a strength that rivaled any warrior on the field. After the man was stabilized, they walked together back toward the square. The woman moved with a grace that made her strength seem effortless, though he knew the weight of responsibility she carried could not be light. "You handle that well," she said quietly, glancing at him with a soft acknowledgement. He shook his head, smiling faintly. "I followed your lead," he admitted. "You taught me more about courage in the past few days than years on the battlefield ever did." Her eyes softened at his words, but there was still a shadow of worry in her gaze. "It's not easy," she said. "Every choice has consequences. Even when you try to do the right thing, someone can still get hurt. That's why I ask for care in small ways. The small choices build trust, and trust keeps people safe." He nodded, absorbing the lesson. He had spent years relying on strategy, strength, and immediate action to survive. Here he was learning patience, empathy, and the subtle power of respecting another person's boundaries. And with every day, he felt his own heart shifting, the warrior's hard edges softening under the quiet influence of her presence. As they continued walking, they came upon a small child who had wandered away from her parents and was crying by the side of the road. The soldier instinctively stepped forward to pick her up, but the woman held out her hand. "Let me," she said gently. "Sometimes the smallest hands need the softest touch." He stepped back, observing as she knelt down, speaking softly to the child, holding her gently and reassuring her until the tears ceased. He realized that even this simple act required bravery. The bravery to face fear and vulnerability in another human being without imposing control. and as he watched, he felt admiration deepen into something more profound, a desire to protect, to honor, and to learn from her every gesture. By evening, the village was settling into quiet once more. They returned to the square, the sky painted in shades of pink and violet, and the first stars appearing overhead. The soldier noticed the way she paused, taking a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing for a moment in the calm of the twilight. She was exhausted, but she continued to stand tall, a quiet testament to resilience and dedication. He hesitated, unsure whether to speak. Finally, he said softly, "Do you ever feel alone in carrying all this?" And she looked at him, her gaze steady. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but then I remember that people trust me, and that gives me strength. And now, you help. Your presence makes a difference, even if you think it doesn't." His chest tightened at her words. For someone who had spent most of his life relying on himself, the idea that his simple presence could matter was unfamiliar. Yet, he felt a warmth spreading through him, a sense that perhaps connection, trust, and compassion were as important as courage and skill. Night fell fully, and the village grew still. They walked together back to the small house where the injured man rested. Inside, she moved to prepare a simple meal for him, her hands steady despite fatigue. He observed quietly, realizing that her bravery was continuous, unrelenting, and often unseen by others. He had fought battles visible to all, but she fought battles that demanded silence, patience, and profound empathy. When the man finally slept, they stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars shone above them, distant and steady, as if offering quiet guidance. The soldier spoke softly, unsure how to convey the depth of what he felt. "You've taught me something important," he said. "That strength isn't only about fighting or surviving. Sometimes it's about caring, respecting, and protecting in ways that don't leave scars." He looked at him, her expression softening. "And you've taught me something too," she replied quietly, "that it's okay to trust, to accept help, and to allow someone else to share the burden." For a long moment they stood in silence, the air between them filled with understanding, respect, and unspoken connection. The soldier realized that the journey they had begun together was more than assistance or duty. It was learning to face life's challenges side by side, with courage, patience, and heart. As he returned to his shelter that night, the soldier's mind replayed the day's events. Each small choice, each act of care, and each moment of restraint had left an impression on him. He understood now that life's greatest challenges were often quiet, invisible, and deeply personal, and facing them required the same bravery he had relied on in war, but tempered with empathy, patience, and respect. His warrior's heart trembled, not from fear, but from the recognition that true courage could take many forms. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope that he could be both strong and gentle, both decisive and caring, and that the bond he was forming with her could help heal not only the village, but himself as well. The next morning arrived with a soft, golden light that filled the village streets, casting warmth over the stone houses and small gardens. The soldier walked slowly, taking in the quiet beauty of the village, and yet he felt a subtle tension inside, a sense that today might bring a test, not of skill or strength, but of heart and trust. He knew that real courage was not measured by battles fought, but by the choices made in the spaces between life and fear. The woman was already outside, tending to a small group of villagers who had gathered for basic medical attention. She moved with a calm authority, her hands precise as she cleaned a wound, applied herbal poultices, and offered gentle reassurance. Her voice was soft but steady, carrying a warmth that seemed to ease the fear of those around her. The soldier watched quietly, careful not to intrude, yet feeling a growing admiration for the way she handled both the work and the weight of responsibility. Suddenly, a commotion erupted at the edge of the square. A young boy had fallen from a tree and injured his arm. The soldier and the woman moved swiftly toward him, their steps synchronized, almost instinctive. The boy's cries echoed through the square, drawing the attention of nearby villagers. She knelt beside him, her hands moving quickly but gently, checking the injury. "Do not remove the cloth completely," she said softly, glancing at the soldier. "It's sensitive, and we need to avoid causing more pain." He nodded immediately, stepping back but remaining close enough to assist if necessary. His mind raced with the instinct to act, to fix, to protect. Yet he remembered the lessons of the past days, the importance of restraint, patience, and honoring the trust placed in him. Watching her work, he realized that sometimes true courage was quiet and careful, not loud or forceful. She spoke soothingly to the boy, encouraging him to relax while she applied gentle pressure around the wound to reduce swelling. The soldier observed, noticing the subtle ways she reassured him, the soft touch on his shoulder, the calm tone of her voice, the way her eyes met his with warmth and confidence. And in that moment, he felt a profound respect for her, for the way she balanced strength with empathy, authority with gentleness. As the boy's cries gradually subsided, the soldier stepped closer, offering a clean cloth to reinforce the bandage without touching the sensitive area. She accepted it with a nod, guiding his hands with quiet instruction. Together, they worked in harmony, a team bound not by orders or discipline, but by trust, understanding, and shared purpose. When the boy's arm was secure and he could move without pain, she helped him stand. He looked at her with wide eyes, still trembling, but smiling faintly. "Thank you," he whispered, and she nodded, giving him a gentle pat on the back. The soldier felt a warmth spread through him, a quiet satisfaction in witnessing the effect of compassion and careful care. The rest of the day passed in a rhythm of small tasks, helping a woman carry water, tending to a man with a fever, distributing clean bandages. Each time the soldier followed her guidance, learning not just the technical aspects of care but the emotional wisdom behind her choices. He began to notice subtle things, the way she spoke to people as if they mattered above all else, the way she moved to protect without controlling, the way she taught by example rather than words. As evening approached, the sky turned shades of orange and purple, casting a soft glow over the village. The soldier and the woman sat quietly on the steps of the small chapel, watching the last rays of sunlight fade. There was a peaceful silence between them, a moment of rest after a day of small victories and challenges. "You've changed," she said softly, breaking the quiet. "Since you arrived, you've learned to see things differently. You've learned to care in ways that aren't about orders or force, but about respect and patience." He looked at her, surprised at the observation, and then nodded slowly. "I have," he admitted. "I came here expecting rest. I didn't expect to learn what real courage looks like, or how much strength there is in gentleness." She smiled faintly, a warmth in her eyes that seemed to reach into his very heart. "And I've learned something too," she said. "I've learned that it's okay to trust, to let someone share the burden. Courage is easier when it's not carried alone." For a long moment, they sat in silence, letting the words settle between them. The soldier felt his heart tremble, not from fear, but from understanding. Here in this quiet village, he had discovered that bravery was not only in facing enemies, but in protecting, respecting, and trusting another person's vulnerability. And he realized that the bond forming between them was more than friendship. It was a deep, human connection, fragile, yet powerful. Night fell fully, and the village was quiet except for distant sounds of animals and the occasional soft murmur of people settling in for the evening. The soldier and the woman walked slowly through the streets, their steps in harmony, the cool night air carrying the scent of herbs and fresh earth. They paused at the edge of the village, looking out over the fields bathed in moonlight. The soldier spoke softly, almost hesitant. "I used to think bravery was about surviving, about facing danger without fear. But now, I see it's also about trusting, about holding back, about caring without overstepping." She nodded, understanding fully. "Yes, it's about knowing when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to listen. And it's about being willing to open your heart, even when it's risky." Her words resonated deeply with him. He thought of the past days, the small acts of courage, the moments of restraint, the lessons learned in the quiet spaces between danger and care. And he realized that his heart, once hardened by war, had begun to soften, touched by the presence of someone who understood strength in a new way. They returned to the square where lanterns glowed softly, casting a warm light on the cobblestones. Villagers moved quietly about their homes, and the soldier noticed the sense of calm and trust that had grown in just a few days. The village, though scarred by past hardship, was alive with resilience, patience, and care, and he knew that part of that spirit came from her, the woman who had taught him more about courage and humanity than he had learned in years on the battlefield. As they parted for the night, the woman looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and quiet hope. "Thank you for being here," she said softly, "for respecting, for helping, for learning. It makes a difference." He smiled, feeling a profound warmth in his chest. "No," he replied gently. "Thank you for showing me what it means to truly care." That night, as he lay down under the soft glow of the lantern, the soldier felt a peace he had not known in years. He had come expecting only rest, but he had found something far greater, a connection, understanding, and a lesson in courage and compassion that would stay with him forever. He thought of the woman, of the villagers, of the small victories and challenges of the day. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to hope, not only for himself, but for the people around him, for the chance to build a life shaped by trust, respect, and care. His warrior's heart, once hardened by years of battle, now trembled with something entirely new, not fear, but recognition of the quiet power of empathy, patience, and human connection. And he understood that the greatest victories were not always visible, not always celebrated, but lived quietly in acts of courage, gentleness, and unwavering respect for one another. The night deepened, and the village slept peacefully. The soldier, thinking of the lessons he had learned and the bond he had formed, finally closed his eyes. In that moment, he realized that true strength could coexist with tenderness, that bravery could be measured not just in battle, but in care, trust, and love. And he knew, with quiet certainty, that both he and the woman had changed, together, in ways that would endure long after the war and the scars of the past.